And welcome back to the 20 Strongest Captain Class Shinigami Various Series. Last time we talked about Rukia, and now we're dealing with the actual Master of Ice himself, Toshiro Hitsugaya. Someone who I've never really quite gotten on the bandwagon with. I don't hate Toshiro, I don't love Toshiro, he's fine. But the fact is, him and Byakuya have always had like really heavy fan bases, and I'm like, I get they get a lot of screen time, but they're really not that cool of characters. Toshiro is just a kid. He's got a lot of cool abilities, and Byakuya is just an ass. Even after he's done being a bad guy, he's still an ass. So, like, he's the aristocratic, follow the rule, family, regal, hold yourself in high esteem kind of guy. So I never really got into those characters, but I do acknowledge that they are extremely strong. I mean, Toshiro is considered a captain for a reason, despite the fact he's young. He's the youngest captain by far in 13 Court Guard Squad. He is still, as you can see, in my opinion, one of the stronger ones. He's not in the top 5, but he's definitely in the top 10, I think. And that has to do a lot with just his sheer ability with his Zanpakuto, because if you actually look at Toshiro Hitsugaya, he doesn't really have a great deal of Kido ability. I'm not to say he doesn't know Kido, but we don't see him use it at all. He's a master with his sword, and he's pretty good with flash step, but he doesn't seem to have any real hand-to-hand capabilities, which would make sense because, size-wise, he's not someone who's designed for physical combat. Even beyond someone like a Rukia, who we actually have seen be in physical combat, or Soifon, who's, despite her frame, is a ninja. But really, his abilities come with the mastery of his sword. And he has really nearly mastered his sword. His Zanpakuto Hyorimaru is considered to be the strongest ice and water type Zanpakuto. Hyorimaru, and basically all of the abilities of Hyorimaru are just the same abilities it has in Bankai, just amplified. I need to get Hyorimaru up here right now, so I know every one of his abilities. I'm not going to get a picture for all of his abilities. Toshiro Hitsugaya. Here we go. And then basically just get all of Hyorimaru's abilities. Now, generally, Hyorimaru and Shikai, even though it technically has the abilities in Shikai that it has in Bankai, doesn't really utilize them because they're just not at a level that makes sense to use. But more or less, he can create ice, creates frozen water, basically liquid frozen water that instantly freezes. Ice dragons are one of the big things it seems to create. In terms of his Shikai special abilities, overall what he can do is, it's the basic power to control the weather. A separate ability is to create basically vacuum ice walls. This he used against Basby to counteract his flames. He's also able of generating a protective wall of ice by finely weaving threads of ice together. And he can lay down a trap, placing 5 snowflake-shaped ice crystals on the ground in the pentagon formation. When the opponent steps in the trap, each snowflake sends a line of ice towards them. The space within the pentagram is encased in a large pellet trapping the opponent. Similar to Rukia's first dance, but different in the sense that it's an actual ice pillar, not just sheer cold. And it's something that needs to be set up more than Hitsugaya's does. Rukia's does. His Bankai, Daiguren Hyorimaru, which translates to Great Roaring Cold Shining Moon, depending on basically the Viz translation, because Hyorimaru honestly just translates itself into Ice Ring, whereas apparently it's Mahapadam Ice Ring? I don't know what that is. It means. What is Mahapadam? Or Manapadam? Padma, yeah. Manapadam. It's Buddhism. Okay, which is Great Lotus. Okay, that's what's supposed to translate to. So Great Lotus Ice Ring, essentially. Interestingly, Hyorimaru, I believe, does have like Ryu in there, so I'm surprised Dragon didn't come up. Though it makes sense why his spirit is an ice dragon. And Bankai. His abilities include Bankai regeneration, as long as there's water to revive, or in the air, or nearby. It can revive indefinitely. Linger, he can create the ice puppet, which he fooled Holly for. Is really only good one time in a fight, though. He can shield himself with his ice wings. Ryu Senkai, who's basically, he throws like ice javelins at people. Big, like, ice stalagmites. Senin Hiro is 1,000-year ice potion. This is the technique he used against Luffy, where he makes all those columns of ice that basically, or pillars of ice that basically surround and circle the opponent and freeze them and crush them at the same time. Hoten Hyakusu, Frozen Heaven 100 Flower Funeral. This is an extension of his weather manipulation capability. He only used it when he was down to about a quarter of his petals on his Bankai. This basically creates a opening in the sky, and he basically snowflakes fall. They land on the opponent, and they basically encase them in flowers and basically freeze them to death, more or less. When he says, when all 100 petals fall, the life of the one whose touch will be over, which he's really just assuming at that point. There's also Guncho Surara, Icicle Flock. Again, icicles basically come at your opponent. Did I actually get that first one right? Ryu Sen. Oh, no, sorry. That was where he stabbed the opponent. It was like an ice flower basically encased them and killed them. Sorry, that was my bad. The Hairyu Senbi is the one where he just attacks with his tail. Zenku, the ability to control Hiro Senbai's technique in the air. And then Gucho Surara, Icicle Flock. That's where he fires the giant icicles. Now, in his Bankai, as I think you can see in the image. Actually, you can't see it in this image. He has these 12 petals, ice petals. And it was believed that when the final petal runs out, his Bankai ends. But what actually that is when the final petal runs out, his Bankai reaches its full strength. Because he's mastered his Bankai fairly well. His Bankai hasn't matured enough yet to be at its fullest. But he managed to age his adult body to reach completion in order to achieve its full potential. So he can temporarily age himself up to reach the full potential of his Bankai. Now, in his Bankai, he can freeze all matter in front of him after 4 seconds of building up his power. In his mature form, he can flash freeze extremely large objects at a distance with a simple gesture of his hand. This also extends to objects that his source cuts. Additionally, anything that he freezes will have all the functions of its body negated. If anyone touches Hitsugaya on this form, they'll be flash frozen as well. Which, in essence, makes his abilities far more powerful than Rukia's long term. So, how does he actually match up to the other captains? Well, I can tell you right now, he scored higher than Mayuri and Rukia did. When I did this, and again, I'd have to thinking on it again, if I ever redid it, their numbers probably wouldn't be the same. But in terms of the wins, he got more than both. Rukia and Mayuri had more wins or had the same amount of wins. Hitsugaya had more wins, but against Yama, he's done. He can't do anything. Yama is the worst opponent for him to go against. Even if he went against him in his matured Bankai, Yama's flames literally burn at the heat of the sun. He wouldn't be able to maintain his Bankai, he wouldn't even be able to maintain his Shikai. Yama is just the complete antithesis to Hitsugaya, so he loses that fight right out of the gate. Against Ichibei with Ichimonji, it is a bit of a difficult thing because, like with Rukia, there's a scenario where his ink might freeze upon touching, Hitsugaya in those forms. However, there is also the problem that Ichimonji could still steal the black off of Hyorimaru, and by that admission, Toshiro himself, and basically render him nothing but bones. Especially if Ichimonji or Ichibei using Ichimonji goes into, I can't remember the name of the technique right off. We'll get it when we talk about Ichibei eventually. The technique where he basically creates like the giant shrine and cemetery and basically literally peels all the black off someone. Literally just sucks it all and leaves them nothing but bones and nothing else. He more than likely, between his ability of Kido, his ability with his sword, and the fact that matters that they clashed, let's be clear. The real way that Toshiro could beat Ichibei and a lot of the captains, let's be frank, it's for him to go into his mature form. But as far as we know, he can't do that unless his ice petals are completely done. It's a battle, it's a war of attrition at that point. Can he outlast his opponent long enough to reach the adult matured form he has and use the full capabilities of his Bankai? And the answer, unfortunately, to all the people he lost against is no. He's not going to last long enough in a fight for that to be the case. And Ichibei is someone he lost. Ichibei's sword alone is something that it's going to completely cut out the middleman here, because he's not going to be able to reach that form because its name's going to be cut in half. I like to do this now whenever I go put an opponent against Ichibei. What's half of their Zanpakuto's name? If he's in Shikai and he clashes with a Ichimonji, Hyorimaru would turn into Numaru, or I think it'd be Hori. It'd be Hori, but Bankai would be Daigyu Yori, or Urin Yori. Either way, its name would be cut in half, its power would be cut in half, so at that point, there's no point in saying whether or not he'd get to that stage. So yeah, he does completely lose to these guys right at the gate. Against Soifone, though, if you watched my video with Soifone, he does beat Soifone in the fight. The reason he beats Soifone in the fight really stems down to the fact that Soifone is certainly faster and more capable in a hand-to-hand fight than he is, but she still has to deal with his elemental Zanpakuto. His Zanpakuto, especially if he's able to go into Bankai, which against someone he could, because whether or not they know about their abilities in this fight, which generally speaking I don't go with that idea. They can still sense give an idea how strong the other is by sensing their Ryatsu and the Reishi. And yeah, he can tell Soifone's no joke. He'd probably be able to block if she hits him the first time, he's going to stop the second hit just with his Zanpakuto alone. He goes in the Bankai, he can block all of her attacks. She tries Shunko, he can literally freeze her in place if he needs to. Just bide his time with ice. If she tries to fire Jaiko Rakobin at him, the fires a missile, he can easily just blast him from a distance with his ice as well. She could blitz him theoretically and double tap him and then kill him, sure. But we're talking about the most likely scenarios, and the most likely scenario is he's able to cover his weaknesses and exploit hers in this case. So ultimately, I do have to go with him taking the victory against Soifone. I also give him surprisingly the victory against both Gin and Rose. Now, in hindsight, I might reconsider the Gin one. But with Rose, I definitely think he takes the win against Rose. The problem here is that Rose's Shikai, we only ever saw one real ability from it. We're certain it has more, and it's sound and music based. As a whip, it's a bit of an unpredictable weapon. But again, his Shikai can just freeze it in place if it hits something, keep it there. He's clearly as skilled a swordsman, if not a more skilled swordsman than Rose. Bankai to Bankai, Rose's Bankai would pose an initial problem. But really, if he just sensing that his Zanpakuto is sound and music based, he would probably just freeze his ears long before he Kinshara Butsudan even took place, which means he's not even hearing what he's saying at that point. So, and even if he did hear what he's saying, all he has to do is freeze the entire dance troupe down, and then he's good. So, when it comes to Gin was a trickier one. I had to basically ask myself the question, is Daigyoran Hyorimaru capable of withstanding Kinshara, Kamishini no Yari? Now, I think I hit with the poison of Kamishini no Yari. The answer to that is 100% no. But ultimately, the wings provide a pretty good defense. He can reinforce it with his own Ryatsu if he needs to, and the wings can grow back indefinitely. So and he's got far more options than Gin has. Gin's tricky, certainly. He can make use of what he has, but he's got far more options of attack and defense than Gin has. So ultimately, I felt like, yeah, Gin probably would lose that fight. Though Gin is shown to at least have has shown more Kido knowledge than, honestly, Toshiro has. We never seen him use it in the combat. So I did give the win in that case to Gin. Unohana was another one that was really on the tricky side for me to kind of figure out if I should give her the win or not. Because again, we're not talking about her Shikai versus anything, because her Shikai is not a combat type Shikai at all. She's a far more skilled swordsman than he is. Definitely, she's a far more better actual fighter than he is, because she's the first Kenpachi. The only person probably greater as an actual swordsman than her was probably Yamamoto and Kenpachi. That's it. They were probably the only two that could have beaten her in a fight. I don't even think, honestly, Shunsui could beat her in a fight, straight up sword to sword. But then you go into what her Kaido, it's like literally Wolverine healing levels of Kaido. She can literally regrow her hand back in an instant. Her Kido knowledge is just immense, far superseding his. Her experience also, she would know to keep her distance and only go in when she had to. And she's probably better at flash step than he is. Then you go into her Bankai, which seems to be acid of some kind. That's what it really seems to be, is acid. And while it might freeze upon the contact with his eyes, if it hits any part of him, he's screwed. Like, he doesn't have it. He might be able to, like, freeze it quickly and save himself, but that's if he can act quick enough. So it really is difficult to kind of judge where Unohana stands, but I think the fact is she was just stronger. She was just overwhelmingly stronger than a lot of the characters. We just only saw her in the one fight. And because of what we do know about her, because of what we know about Toshiro and how he kind of interacts with individuals, plus the fact that he's actually pretty easy to rile up. That's something that, even though he has a really calm demeanor, he's actually a really easy individual to get under his skin when you really try. And Unohana would exploit that. So I think Unohana would take the win over him. I'm pretty confident in that. However, I think Shinji would pretty much lose against him in a fight. And the reason for that is pretty self-explanatory, as I've said with the other Shinji fights, is that, yes, Sakanade is a pretty impressive ability, if I'm going to be honest. But it also has a lot of weaknesses. It's no good against someone who can figure it out. I don't actually fall into the category of thinking that Hitsugaya could figure it out. But the problem is, if you can attack with a wave of like a radius effect type of like Ryujin Juka's massive amount of fire, Zenbon Zakura's massive amount of blades, doesn't matter what direction they're coming from, you can basically cover your bases, then you pretty much have a pretty good counter to his abilities. And I think Toshiro does qualify in that category for that, because he can cover all of his bases, all of his weaknesses with ice if he has to. He's also probably more skilled, I think, overall as a swordsman than Shinji. Shinji has more experience and is very knowledgeable in Kido, but I just think Shinji gets a little overconfident with his blade, and I think Toshiro would exploit that. Against Byakuya, I do still think Byakuya, again, I actually like Byakuya even less than I like Toshiro, because at least Toshiro has a lot of variety with his Zanpakuto. It's just more pedals with his Zanpakuto. I've never been a big Byakuya fan, but I do acknowledge the fact that Byakuya is one of the strongest captains. And unfortunately, Toshiro, I don't think could ultimately take on Byakuya in a long-term fight. Because when I say long-term, again, if he reached his adult form, yes, he would beat Byakuya, I do think. But that's assuming he reached it. Again, against everyone he lost against, he doesn't last long enough in the fight to reach the adult form. We've seen that Byakuya is a master swordsman, probably at least on par with Toshiro, probably even greater because he's older and had more time to learn. He is a Kido master, probably far exceeding Hitsugaya, because we just haven't seen enough Kido usage from Hitsugaya. He's more skilled in flash step, that we've seen demonstrated completely. And we don't actually see him very much in hand-to-hand combat, but it's implied he does know his stuff when it comes to hand-to-hand. Then you talk about his Zanpakuto. Well, it's a basic ability. It's versatile. Just Zenbon Zakura alone is 1,000 blades that he can manipulate on his own. Then you talk about Kagoroshi, which is millions upon millions of blades at that point. He can just overwhelm Hitsugaya. Not to mention, he could put him in a binding Kido. Ryuju Koro, I believe, is the 5 glowing rectangles piercing. That's one of his favorites, and that would freeze him up. So, yeah, that I think ultimately would that would be the end for Toshiro. I don't think he could take on Byakuya in a long-term fight at all, to be frank. Who he could take on pretty easy, though, is Sajin. Sajin would get his shit kicked in by Toshiro. And that's the problem, is that the giant and him are so connected that if one takes damage, the other takes damage. That's the problem. Now, it's beneficial that means the Bankai can repair itself. It's one of the only Bankai that can do that, as far as we know. It's the only one. Along with Mayuri's, but that's because he modified it. But furthermore, it's the fact that the giant is nothing more than pure power. That's all it is. It has no abilities as far as we know. Now, when it got to when it took his armor off, then it kind of had the ability to basically be invincible, but that was temporary. So, yeah, Sajin would lose horrifyingly to Hitsugaya. Shunsui, on the other hand, would pretty much whip his butt. It's the same issue with Byakuya, that he's just better in every field of combat than Toshiro is. He's one of the oldest captains. He's had far more experience. He's just far more skilled. He's ambidextrous, which gives him an extra field of variety and danger that Hitsugaya would have to deal with. His Zanbakuto is one of the most unique, powerful, and tricky to deal with because you don't know what game you're playing until you're playing it. Then his Bankai, I mean, this is one of the only characters who, if Hitsugaya managed to get to his full mature Bankai, Shunsui's Bankai would completely counter that because any damage he took would be negated, would be reflected on Hitsugaya, and then Hitsugaya would be affected by lesions, then he'd be in the water, which maybe he'd freeze, and then the whole freaking thread would cut his throat. It wouldn't matter that the matter and the function were ceased. Basically, it's completely countered by that fact. Against the 2 Division 9 captains, he does completely win. Against Kensei, he's the worst type of opponent because he can attack at long range, long distance, all that. So he's the worst kind of opponent for Kensei to deal with. Not to mention, there's no way he'd let himself actually get touched by those gauntlets. Now, that's not to say Kensei might not be able to get a hit in, but Toshiro's also taken a lot of hits. He can take a punch if he needs to. So he completely beats Kensei, in my opinion, without very much difficulty. Against Tozen, it is a bit more tricky, but again, Suzumushi and Nishiki, I don't think I think it all depends on how much spiritual pressure the opponent has, because he used it again on a very weakened Uryu. He didn't even try to use it on Kenpachi. He tried to just obliterate Kenpachi, and that failed. Benehiko could be dangerous, but Hitsugaya's Zanpakuto is far more useful than that. And then Bankai to Bankai, Toshiro could easily just freeze the entirety of the Bankai, and then I don't mean like freeze the Bankai itself, but freeze like the area around him. Basically, be able to figure out where Tozen is and counteract that. Just because he'd be able to just freeze the air and kind of feel the rush of the air. He'd be one of the few individuals, because of the nature of his Bankai, cold and all that's the cold in the air, that he'd be able to pull off kind of a different type of version of what Kenpachi did, where he kind of just sensed the blade coming in and just reacted. It's more that he could probably feel the cold and the movement in the air and react to that. So, yeah, he'd beat both of them without really any difficulty. Going into the final 4, that's the wrong one I wanted to do. There we go. We're talking about Kenpachi, and again, if we went all the way to him going to his mature form, yeah, I do think he could beat Kenpachi. But he's not getting that. Let's be flat and honest. Against Kenpachi, he's not getting that far in the fight. Kenpachi's sheer Ryatsu is enough that he would just blow away most of the ice that even starts to freeze upon him. His Nozarashi is pure power incarnate. So if you remember the fight, and obviously Toshiro is much stronger than his fight with Haribel now. But when you remember his fight with Haribel, where Haribel just kind of bum rushed him, not even in a release form yet, with her blade, and just crashed into him. He went flying back. Imagine someone with a blade so large and so powerful could cut a meteor into pieces with just one. Oh, wait, we're almost out of battery, but we're almost done here. Cut a meteor into pieces, cut through space itself. Kenpachi lands one blow with Nojirashi, and Toshiro is done. Now, maybe he survives once with an ice clone. He does not survive a second time. And if Kenpachi goes into Bankai, he is absolutely done. There's too much pure power, surprisingly Ryatsu resistance from Kenpachi, and ferocity that, there's nothing that Toshiro can honestly do against Kenpachi. There really isn't. Again, if he gets to his mature form, he'd win. But that's assuming the fight went that long, and it would not go that long. I really don't think it would. Against Mayuri, it's a bit of a similar circumstance, but Mayuri does, I think, lose to Hitsugaya. For a similar reason they lost to Ruki is that Hiyori Maru is very... It's not a good ability against Konjiki Agisogi Jizo to go against. It could probably freeze the poison in the air. It would freeze the Bankai itself. He can attack at long range and just keep out of the range of the poison. Mayuri is supposedly one of the as a Keto Master, one of the most proficient users in the Soul Society, but we rarely see him use it, which is weird. So ultimately, I would have to go with Hitsugaya in that. And finally, we already talked about Rukia, so we'll just address Rukia real quick. His abilities are just a more advanced version of her abilities. He doesn't just control cold, he controls ice, and he can just flash freeze things on an instant in his Bankai and not have the negative effects of breaking apart if he moves too quick. Last but not least, we have the man, the myth, the legend himself, Mr. Hat and Clogs Urahara. Kisuke Urahara. So, Urahara was a tricky one. But ultimately, he's a far greater Keto Master than, honestly, someone like even Mayuri's, from what we can tell, because we've actually seen him use Keto on a master level. His swordsman skill is probably on par, if not greater, than Toshiro. Flash step, we know his hand-to-hand combat is far better. And his Zanbakuto is so versatile, I'm sure we didn't even see half of what it could do. Benihime, from what we can tell, restructures energy. Kanamurake Benihime Atarame restructures anything. You factor that in with Urahara's strategy and intelligence, I don't think the ice really matters. Like, anything that Toshiro actually throws at him, the ice just doesn't matter. I don't think. Because he's just going to break through it, set him up for defeat, and then blow him to hell, either with just Benihime's Shikai, I can't remember the name of it, the one where it's basically the exploding fire net, which is like a nuke going off almost. Or he could also even restructure the ice itself. Like, he could restructure the ice temporarily and then cut down Toshiro. There's just so many avenues that Hitsugaya could lose this fight that I had to give the win to Urahara in this. But ultimately, that's my thoughts on Hitsugaya as the 8th strongest captain in the 13 Court Guard squad. 8 out of 20 is still a very impressive ranking, in my opinion. What are your thoughts? You think I was right? Think I was wrong? Think he wins against more or loses against more? Put in the comments below. Thanks for watching. I hope you enjoyed. Like, comment, share, subscribe. I'll see you next time. Hit that bell if you want notifications. Later.